Jesus Christ problem is one problem. The second problem that we must address that does deserve some serious attention from us, in the same vein of lying against what God reveals, it is the problem of what we call the curse of Ham, or the story of Noah. As I mentioned, we addressed this before, but I am seeking to, over the next couple of sessions, carry out the analysis of this story in much more detail. So what is it? Well, even before going to it, why is this important? The idea of God as a white man, the angels is white, Jesus is white, etc., etc. The whole biblical, or all of the biblical narratives being whitewashed or Caucasianized or whatever we say, that is a thing that was just, it had a profound effect on our psychological well-being, and it ends up having an effect on our moral life, not just us as blacks, but also on Caucasians as well, as we discussed. But our time here in the United States of America, subjected to slavery in the antebellum South, subjected to the Jim Crow racism and the racism up north, it was also based upon biblical foundations. And it's very important that we know this. So it wasn't just the idea of God as a white man from the church that was given to us. The very state or the status of us as slaves, as sharecroppers, as second or third class citizens, that also was biblically based. So we can see in a very profound way that the Bible was really used to cause a lot of damage to the African American people. And I could extend this to say it has done a lot of damage the way it has been presented. The way that, I shouldn't say the Bible on its own, but the way the Bible has been influenced and presented has done a lot of damage to the people of the diaspora. That's the Caribbean, that's even South America, that's Africa, etc. And ultimately, we can say that the Bible has been used to cause profound damage to the world. Because this problem, or these set of problems that we're addressing, again, we're addressing Islam in Black America. We could very much take up a series to say Al-Islam and the value of the woman. And we can point to the fact, as an example, that the feminist movement, though it has gone sort of off the rail today, it is the outcome of a history of women genuinely being mistreated. Women were regarded in the history of the church as having no souls. Women were regarded as Jezebels in nature. And all of this goes back to these biblical figures, and it ultimately goes back to Eve, the mother of all living, or a misconstrued or an incorrect reading of who Eve was or is, and that wrong reading being presented to humanity. Essentially, the woman is the one that got us in trouble. She has to be locked up or controlled or contained so that she doesn't cause any more trouble. These things these beliefs have affected the position and the role of women down through time. And these reactions to the mistreatment of the women, they come about because of this. So we can look at, I'm saying this to say, we can look at not only race and slavery, but we can look at the treatment of women. We can look at the treatment of the poor. We can look at a lot of things in the history of the world, or at least in the Western world, but the Western world has spread globally, and we can trace it back to biblical roots. Now, to be fair, however, we could also trace the advance of the world positively, like the ridding of slavery, like the recognition of the value of the human being, the rights of women. We can also trace that to, if not the Bible directly, and the Bible people. The difference is, though, what we find in history is that the Bible people never really came into these recognition of the recognition of universal human rights, the recognition of the value of the female, the races, etc., until after they came into contact with Al-Islam. And that's something that in time the world will have to admit publicly. It is admitted in academia. It is admitted in certain circles, but it's not public knowledge. The Western world, so they will say, people will say, different respondents or speakers will say, the United States is a Christian country. It was the British that outlawed slavery. So, and this is true. But We do not find Enlightenment values, which are essentially Judeo-Christian values. They are, but we don't find the Jews and Christians propounding these values in the spirit of the Enlightenment until after they made contact with Muslims and Muslim scholars in the Qur'an and the prophetic tradition. In other words, our view, if we expand the history of the world and we tell the truth, we will see that it was the Qur'an that showed the Jews and the Christians the light of their own scripture. It shined the light and gave them better insight on what they had with them. So we're going to get to that. Well, let me just give you an example before we go. They will say today that the freedom of the human being, like these inalienable rights that, again, the United Nations recognizes, the Western democracies recognize, the United States recognize, etc. They will say these come from Enlightenment philosophers. And the Bible people will say, yes, but these ideas were inspired in the Enlightenment philosophers, many philosophers, many of whom were people who were influenced by, if not directly, students of the church tradition. And this comes from the idea that man is made in the image and likeness of God. That's not Islamic language, that's their language, and that's what they say. And I repeat, they won't be wrong, but if you follow their own history, you all who read the book, so you can just look this up nowadays, the idea of man being created in the image and likeness of God historically among the Bible people was not seen as the inheritance or they didn't give that recognition to every member. That recognition of being in the image and likeness of God, and then from the New Testament people of being a son of God, that type of recognition was not the property common to everybody. It was the property of the members of the church hierarchy, the clergy, the saints, etc. Hence, we have the movements like the Gnostics. We have, even today, we still have the remnants of it with the monasticism, these movements where the men devoted themselves to piety and worship and reflection on scripture and meditation and fasting, etc., so that they can rid themselves of their humanity and become divine or angelic as they understood Adam to be before he fell down in the flesh. So when they say today that this idea of man being in the image and likeness of God is the precursor to this notion of the value of the human being and human rights, they were not reading it that way in medieval times. They were not reading it that way in the beginning of church tradition. They did not come into that type of reading of the text until after they made contact with Muslim thinkers, the Qur'an, and the prophetic tradition. And this is just history. So we are addressing Islam or al-Islam in Black America, but a lot of these points have relevance to the broader human condition. And quite naturally, because al-Islam is a religion, the Qur'an is guidance for all people. Al-Islam is a religion for all people. So though we can take this medicine to cure this disease in this situation, the medicine, because it addresses the universal condition, it can address this particular situation and it can address all other situations. Meaning what? The Qur'an and its light, its healing can address the problem of Black America, and at the same time, it could also be applied to the sicknesses of the world. And inshallah, we'll do more of that in the future.